Comparing two of your favorite games with one another is like comparing two of your favorite ice cream flavors, or two of your favorite snacks, or two of your favorite parents. You might have a preference for one or the other depending on circumstances, but your comparisons are meaningless, and it's all about what it means to you on a singular level. Yeah, but actually, which one do you prefer? Comparing Crash 2 Cortex Strikes Back and Crash 3 Warped is pretty commonplace for most fans of this little orange creature. Crash Bandicoot was the PlayStation pal, much like Super Mario was for Nintendo and that one blue fella was who loves chilies and dogs and the Sega. I grew up with Crash. I grew up playing all of his games. He was there for me at my lowest points as a kid, wandering around trying to figure out life. Crash is like a dad to me. He's a comforted soul. He offers me a safe space, a solace. You should probably wear a t-shirt a little bit more often. How are you perpetually overheating? But why compare Crash 2 and Crash 3 specifically? Well, let's break it down. We're comparing games that come from the same era of Crash Bandicoot titles, which is around the PlayStation era, and there's about 5 of those titles. The eponymous Crash Bandicoot title, or Crash 1 for simplicity, is a platformer like 2 and 3, but it's the earliest title in the franchise and doesn't have the same bells and whistles or technical acumen as its sequels. Crash Team Racing is also a platformer like 2 and 3, but instead of platforms there's a racetrack, and instead of walking, running, jumping and attacking, there's steering, accelerating, drifting and braking. It's a racing game. It's very, very different. And then there's Crash Bash. Crash 2, or Crash Bandicoot Cortex Strikes Back, is what most would consider one of the best PlayStation titles on the console. Crash Bandicoot Warped, or Crash 3, is another title that most would consider a PlayStation classic. As a kid, I loved both of these, but I could never decide which was better, so I'm gonna decide which I prefer right here and right now. And if you don't agree, that's okay. I want to tell you that I've studied game design and storytelling to a passable degree, but I don't want to lie to you. I don't really know that kind of stuff. What I do know there's a bunch of things I remember about being a kid that now, as an adult, I can look back on with bias, nostalgia, and everything else in between. Anyway, let's decide which I think is better out of Crash 2 Cortex Strikes Back and Crash 3 Warped. The Naughty Dog Crash games follow a pretty linear story path in that the first game sets the foundation, the second game follows directly from the ending of the first game, and the third game starts directly after the second game. Platformers don't need strong plots, but for what it's worth, this is a nice little value add, you know, it sets up the stakes quite nicely. That being said, Crash Bandicoot Warped has a considerably better premise than Crash Bandicoot Cortex Strikes Back. Everyone with me? Have I lost the room? I fear I've lost the room. Crash 2's story starts with Cortex, the main villain of the first game, crashing down from heaven and finding a purple power crystal. Cortex realizes he could use a lot of crystals' combined energy to power his ship and take over the world, and now he needs to figure out how to get the rest of the crystals on Earth, of which there are 25 of them. He can't use his old pals. We killed them all in Crash 1. They're all dead. Meanwhile, Crash has found a sister somewhere who needs a battery for her computer, so Crash searches the jungle for a battery and gets abducted. Cortex says, "Crash, I'm a good guy now. Please get the crystals, because now I actually want to save the world." And then Crash starts getting the crystals. I'll be honest with you, when I listened to this as a kid, I couldn't really hear a lot of the stuff Cortex was saying. He communicated through a T8 calculator, matching Guess Who hologram projector. I don't know what's happening here, but we're working for the bad guy apparently. Cortex is of course playing on Crash's good nature and general stupidity, and eventually reveals his true colours. Further down the line, we get in touch with Coco and Dr. Embryo, and they, rightfully, explain to Crash that Cortex is a lying sack of unrecycled garbage. And now Crash needs to eventually stop Cortex from destroying the world after actively contributing towards it. It's an unfortunate situation he's found himself in. As a plot, I don't think it's that amazing in my opinion, but look, Cortex's general writing is absolutely great. The addition of Coco and Brio were incredibly important to the series moving forward, and they both drive the plot well throughout, sowing the seeds of doubt in this incredibly empty field of thought. It's fine, it works. It's the Honda Accord of plots. Crash Warped though, it's time to cook. This is like the Honda Jazz of plots. It's the Honda Civic, the Honda Tesla. I don't know anything about cars. Crash 3's story picks up at the end of 2's story. The Cortex vortex hurtles down to Earth and it crashes into a temple, causes a huge explosion, and some kind of little ghoul escapes from his untimely prison. Turns out this is Uka Uka, Aku Aku's evil twin brother, who was puppeteering Cortex this entire damn time. We then get a glimpse of the new life. Crash, Coco, this weird looking dog, and Aku Aku are all having a great time outside their new hovel. But they are quickly interrupted by an incredibly non-threatening laugh. We then come back to Cortex, who is just pleading on his knees to Uka Uka, who says Cortex has failed him twice already, because there was 2 games before this one. However, since Cortex did set Uka Uka free, he's feeling generous. He's going to give him a third chance to get the gems and the crystals together, but not without enlisting the help of third-party sources, namely Dr. Entropy. By the way, this shot of Entropy in the background legitimately scared the life out of me as a kid. With the introduction of him and Uka Uka, the stakes have been raised. I was genuinely frightened of Entropy, and for damn good reason too. Imagine you see that shadow at the back of a spot far on either side is or something. We go to the heroes where Aku Aku, who now has a pivotal role in the story and more lines than just Ulabaga, whatever you used to say before, gives the rallying cry to the team and they all burst into action. We're introduced to the warp room, our objective, and boom, we're in the game. Crash Bandicoot Warp feels like a much more cohesive story. It's got considerably better narration than Crash 2. You know the stakes, the new characters introduced all have buy-in from the get-go, the target is clear, the voice acting is great, the storyboarding is well constructed. It's good. It's just really good. I think Crash 3 has the better story, but like I said, the story in these platformers are kind of like the rapper. They don't need to be perfect. The game design, of course, is a different story than the story. I should have scripted this better. When people say Crash 2 and Crash 3 are similar, it's mainly due to the game design mechanics. You give an unassuming player both these games, they probably can't tell the difference outright. The mechanics in both Cortex Strikes Back and Warped are largely similar. Both games have clear agency and some incredibly well-designed controls. The goals and rewards are all laid out well. There's enough narrative in the different level types to understand kind of how you progress. They're both just really well-designed games in my opinion, so how can you even decide which one is better? Decide which one has better design. I don't know what happened there. There's a lot to say around Crash 2 Cortex Strikes Back and the huge jump it made from the original Crash Bandicoot. Crash 1 to me plays like you put a piece of duct tape in a pile of dog fur and you need to pick it out to stick the remains of a smashed family photo frame together or something. Crash 2 plays like the opposite of that, I guess. Crash 2 improved on Crash 1 a lot is what I'm trying to say. You compare these two and it's clear to see how different they are, and that's a huge testament to how well Crash 2 was designed. It tightened up the controls, the scale of difficulty was considerably more manageable, it was a lot more action heavy rather than waiting for spinning logs heavy. Collectibles and objectives were easier to milestone, levels were generally more spaced out, and the variant in the challenge as well. Crash 2 had a huge step up from Crash 1, and I think that there's a lot to say in that. Crash 3, however, had the ability to be a lot more ambitious with the variety of gameplay it could provide, and the subsequent design choices they can make to ensure a smooth transition. Warped had a lot more opportunity to design a variety, because of the ability to reuse as much as possible from Cortex Strikes Back. Because of this, you got to see the developers design levels underwater, or on a tiger, or on a plane, or on a jet ski. They could expand on what they already knew about level design, reuse a lot of the assets from the previous game, but then just implement a lot of different methods of playing. I personally didn't struggle to adapt to all of the different gadgets and gizmos Crash 3 offered as a kid, because they always did a pretty good job of teaching you the mechanics in a safe environment before throwing you to the wolves and having you jet ski out the pit. A lot of people use this as the main point that gets warped, and I get it, there's a lot here. Personally, I don't really care because the quality of the traditional platforming levels wasn't compromised anywhere, but just pretend I spoke about vehicle levels for 20 minutes and make your own conclusions, I don't know. If I'm being honest, I can't really discern between the two from a game design point of view, but speaking about the levels, I don't want to talk about secrets real quick.
Secrets are no fun. Secrets hurt someone.
The secrets in Crash Warped are generally so absurdly hidden that you almost feel anger when you find them. Drive into this specific road sign to access one of the secret levels. Talk to this pterodactyl and go for a spot of tea after you chat to access the other secret level. That's it, and there's no hints. There's no alluding to these things as being significant beforehand. Crash 2 Cortex Strikes Back designs its secrets as a discovery based on deduction skills rather than just random chance. These boxes in Air Crash look like they could be jumped on. There's a little platform over there. Let's try it. Bam, there you are. You found yourself a secret entrance for Snowgo. I wonder if I can go back and use this path we just flew past in Unbearable. Boom, your curiosity has been rewarded. Cortex Strikes Back is Columbo. Warped is Columbus. I don't like Columbus. At their core, both these games do have a similar game design ethos, I mean, besides the secrets, but they feel like they play, progress, and control pretty much the same. However, as a certified gamer from the University of Games, I feel like I'm qualified to say that in my opinion, Crash 2 and Crash 3 feel like they control a little different.
No, it cannot be.
It can be, Plank Demon. Let me explain. Cortex Strikes Back and Warped each have the same core actions Crash can perform. Crash can walk, he can run, he can slide, he can spin, he can jump. Combining a few of these together means you do a belly flop, a slide and jump. Crash has got access to a lot. He gets a yo-yo in Crash 3. That's huge. It's the 90s. Yo-yos are huge. At the core, both games feel the same. However, Crash 3 introduced additional power-ups that you gain from beating boss fights, and it almost trivializes a lot of controls that Crash already has. The game feels considerably safer because of the double jump, the death tornado spin, and the bazooka you get. Most pits are barely a threat because of a double jump and death tornado spin. Pretty much every enemy can be taken out by the bazooka. The controls make the game a little too easy at times, and yes, levels are designed to accommodate for the power-ups, but I feel like not to the precision that Crash 2 had its controls mapped. Crash 2 had all of its levels designed around core controls it introduced right at the start of the game, and you don't build on them. Jumping isn't as floaty, enemies and pitfalls can't be worked around for the most part, as some of them, I mean the spin jump is insane. The game design isn't contradicted often by your movement options. I don't think Crash 3 falls victim to this too often, but Crash 2 barely ever does. And that's mostly because of the controls. Crash 2's jumping doesn't carry momentum. Crash 3's jumping is much more momentum based. One of these offers tighter platforming, another offers speed for faster platforming. Neither of these are bad, but I'm thinking about quality of control and I want precision over speed. Others might want speed over precision. Which one's better? Who's to say? I'm not a jump man. Oh my god. Just going back to the power-ups I spoke about earlier, you get them in Crash Warped via the boss fights, like I mentioned. The boss fights in Crash Warped are incredibly memorable. The Roman Colosseum Tiny Tiger fight, the Arctic Dingodile fight where he has a huge-ass flamethrower, but also taught a lot of kids their first boss shortcut in the game. The daunting fight against Entropy, which, honestly, it probably should have been later in the game. Third boss after this reveal is nuts. The engine fight is probably the most unique boss fight in the game, in the ship with Coco and Pora. And a final battle in the masks while Cortex skids about on a surfboard, this Mondo cool brother. Honestly, all these fights have a huge benefit to Crash Warped, not only because they're very fun boss fights, but also because we hear from these bosses throughout their warp rooms. It feels like we're actively trying to stop them. There's a build to each of these fights. Crash 2 Cortex Strikes Back just had boss fights there, and most of them were kind of bad. Again, I can't emphasize enough how much this is my opinion on this, but compare the engine boss fight from Crash Warped to the engine boss fight from Cortex Strikes Back. This is at the same point in the game, mind you. Fourth boss fight, the big bad, before we fight Neo Cortex as the final boss. You think about the grandeur of each of these fights, and which you would easily attribute as a boss fight. It has to be Warped by far. The final boss in Crash Bandicoot Warped is a fight between two warring masks, good versus evil, struggling for power that you have to actively avoid in order to deal with Neo Cortex. The final boss in Cortex Strikes Back is following home to your uncle's house in mile traffic. We got a cease and desist from Embryo at some point in the game that referenced the boss fights, but other than that, they don't really fit into the game anywhere near as naturally as Crash Warped. They didn't fit the narrative, the fights were generally very simple, and their introduction felt more like an annoying bug to fix rather than something to solve. The bosses aren't the focus of Crash 2 Cortex Strikes Back, so I'm honestly not that concerned that they were pretty forgettable, but it's chalk and cheese compared to Warped. Chalk and walk, Crash 2. Cheese? Yes please, Crash 3s. Going back to the levels real quick, I wanted to talk about the general difficulty that both these games provide and how much challenge that they introduce. I alluded to it a little earlier, but Crash 3 has a lot more variety regarding the different vehicles and movement options that you get. However, because of that, a lot of the levels are quite easy in this game. You've got to introduce all of these new level traversion methods in a somewhat simple environment, but because of that, a lot of the levels are just introduction levels. Crash 2 doesn't really suffer with this due to the majority of the game being platforming with Crash. Because of this, the difficulty of levels can be iterated on considerably better. We already know Crash controls the way he does in the first two levels, so the difficulty of the environment is constantly fluctuating. Compare that to Crash 3, where 90% of him is just trying to pass a driver's test. I did say it before, but generally I like the vehicle levels. It compromises the difficulty of Crash Warped a good amount though, unfortunately. Cortex Strikes Back is generally more challenging in its levels because you've got that constant of Crash doing regular platforming, and because of that, you can make the difficulty curve a lot more traditional. Crash Warped did attempt to add another layer of difficulty to its levels through the use of time relics. Races against the clock, trying to finish a level as quickly as you could to earn a sapphire, gold, or platinum relic. Platinum is the best relic you can get. Gold is the minimum you need to complete the game, and sapphire is a participation award you can get in the bin. I honestly really like this addition to the series. I think it's a great challenge to add into the game. It adds to a lot more replayability as well. Not only is it another collectible, but doing these levels to a platinum relic standard can legitimately be very, very difficult as well. Speaking of levels, let's talk style, let's talk fashion, let's talk serving.
Nice shot!
Cortex Strikes Back has a lot of well-designed biomes. There's the jungle, the snowy areas, the swamps, the sewers, the ruins, and eventually the more industrial and machine-driven levels. They all have variety within them in regards to their challenge, but visually and audibly, Naughty Dog focused on a very small sample of backdrops and made them all feel like they were contained in the same world. There's a lot to be said about world building via level aesthetics, and Cortex Strikes Back felt like it was a very concise world that was architected through both nature and industry. Very similar to the themes presented in the original game, Crash 2 felt like a natural extension of the foundation forged by its predecessor. building on the world already established and thus growing the ecosystem of the Wumper Islands. Crash 3 time traveled and just went where they wanted, I guess. The age of the medieval times, the nifty 1950s, the sunken wreckage of Atlantis, getting chased by this dog in the prehistoric area. One game valued being the current world, the other focused on building new worlds. And honestly, it just kinda depends on what you prefer. I personally prefer the variety that Crash 3 Warped offers. Aesthetically, Warped shone in pretty much every domain it decided to delve deeper into. The levels were bright, reuse of domains was offset by slight differences in atmosphere and lighting. There wasn't really an overuse of any specific area, it was almost necessary to take this step in the Crash series. As kids, if we got another 30-ish levels of jungle, snowy areas and swamps, I don't think this game would be anywhere near as memorable as it is these days, and it certainly wouldn't have been received anywhere near as well. Of course, with the ability to warp to multiple different areas in time, you open up new opportunities for music design, and Warp did a fantastic job of mirroring the level aesthetics with background music through the entirety of the game. Every biome in Crash 3 came with an appropriate set of music, and because of the extension of domains, there was so much more creative license. Cortex Strikes Back does the same, enhancing on the sound effects established in the first game into fully fledged backing songs, but it feels like they're more intended to be atmospheric than grand like many of Warped's background music choices. The sound design in Warped as well, it's just wonderful. Everything popped, and in Crash 2 it was there, just not as good. Collecting a crystal in Crash 2 was like ticking a box in a checklist. You've achieved your goal, good job. Collecting a crystal in Crash 3 was like you found treasure in a dark cave. Like, holy moly, look how beautiful and purple and interestingly shaped this is. Going into a level in Crash 2 is running into a static tornado. Going into a level in Crash 3 is being transported. It's hard to describe. These subtle refinements in sound design really do add to the quality of a game, and I think Crash 3 does add on to its sound effects pretty well. And speaking of these refinements, Crash 3 refined a lot of small things to add to the quality of life from Crash 2. The Time Twister is a huge improvement on the standard Warp Room aesthetically, yes, but it also provides a much clearer picture on what you have, what you need to acquire, where you need to go. You also have a box counter in levels alongside a total count of boxes in the level. Crash and Coco had a bunch of really well designed death animations to add on to what was already there. These things are polished, but they do add to a quality of a game. And for what it's worth, Crash 2 also made a lot of quality changes from Crash 1. The biggest one being you can die in a level and still get a gem, which is a huge improvement for most players. Levels can be accessed in any order rather than entirely linear. They added a box counter into the levels. The sound fonts from breaking boxes, killing enemies, and all that stuff was vastly improved. Both games made huge improvements on their predecessor, is what I'm trying to say. Which, if I'm being honest, is where I'm a little unconvinced as to whether comparing these two games against each other is a fair fight. Crash 2 Cortex Strikes Back was a huge improvement on Crash Bandicoot. Crash 3 Warped was an improvement on Crash 2 in my opinion, but nowhere near the same scale as 1 to 2. If I was choosing my favourite after writing this, I'm going to be real, I'm probably going to pick Crash Warped. And it's for a lot of the reasons we've already talked about. The variety of the levels, although I know that's not something that a lot of people like, it's something I really enjoy, and the levels are generally well done. The boss fights have considerably bigger effects on the narrative of the story itself is strong, has more tangible stakes. The platforming is still as good as it's ever been, the aesthetics and sound design is beautiful. I think I prefer Crash 3 to Crash 2 personally. That being said, Crash 2 Cortex Strikes Back has a much tighter and well-designed set of controls. The platforming is much more consistent, there's a much stronger sense of challenge, the aesthetics are much more Crash Bandicoot, and the amount of changes and improvements it made from Crash 1 is astronomical. I'm still not 100% convinced, if I'm honest, but if I've learned one thing from writing this and recording this, it's that both of these games are they're just so good. I'm also going to say this again, this is entirely my opinion, and my opinion is just that, it's an opinion. There's nothing objective in this, you can't objectively have a preference. What you can do, however, is listen, and this is where I open it to you. What do you think? Which do you prefer out of Crash 2 and Crash 3? Let me know. I want to read and see if I can be swayed one way or the other. In any case, I'm going to go to the shop and get my favourite ice cream and snack. And I'm going to call my parents and tell them I love them both. Just like they were Crash 2 and Crash 3. Don't give the phone to Uncle Crash Bash though. Hello, if you're listening to this, thanks for watching my first ever scripted video. It was good fun. I'm going to be doing more, so stick around and subscribe if you want to. You don't have to, it's completely up to you. Oh, and if you want to see me play through Crash, I did a Let's Play of Crash Warped, which you can watch if you want. It's kind of old, don't judge me too hard. Or do, it's up to you, it's a free country I guess, whatever, bye.